this 3-part video series, I'll tell you what it means to create the cinema look in a teaching video and why it's something you'd even want to try. On YouTube, you often hear people talk about achieving a cinematic look, making their videos feel less like video and more like cinema, the filmic look. Now, cinematographers might get a bit annoyed at most of what is said about this, and they might get annoyed about most of what I'm about to say. And they'll get annoyed for good reason, and I'll tell you about that in part 3. But let's just set that aside for now and get on with this filmic look thing. The filmic look isn't something most YouTube creators strive for, but it is something that some try to do, and they tend to be creators who are making travel vlogs and documentaries and who are trying to tell a story rather than those creators who are just sharing their opinion on a thing or giving you instructions on how to do a thing, or maybe reviewing a product, something like that. So those creators tend not to do it. That said, the filmic look has been appearing in some unexpected places over the last few years, particularly in places like adverts, but also in political campaign adverts. And a great example of this is one made for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the US in 2018. And I'll put a link to that in the description box on YouTube for you if you want to have a look at it. Now, when it comes to academics like me making videos, particularly teaching videos, you usually see very little attempt at creating a filmic look. Anything that looks like cinema. You don't tend to see us trying to do it. Instead, our videos tend to fall into one of two formats. The first is the classic PowerPoint presentation. Here, a PowerPoint slide fills most, if not all, of the screen, while the lecturer either narrates off-screen or appears in a small little square at the edge of the screen. And these are usually recorded directly from a laptop in the lecturer's office. There's no special lighting, the laptop is usually bog standard, and the office is typically not sound treated, which just means the walls don't have acoustic panels on them to absorb echoes, so the sound can be a little tinny. And because of that, the video and audio quality tends to be mediocre at best, and the video tends to be extremely static. Images and text sit mostly motionless on the screen until the lecturer advances to the next slide. The next common format, the second common format, is the lecture capture. This is the standard fixed camera at the back of the teaching room or lecture theatre recording a live lecture. The audio typically comes from a lectern mic or a wireless lapel mic if the lecturer is moving around a lot. The room may or may not be treated for sound, and the lecturer is again usually using PowerPoint slides, but this time projected behind them on a big screen. And this doesn't usually come out well on the video, so the slides are often embedded alongside the lecture room capture in a split screen layout. Now, this setup is slightly less static because you've got the lecturer moving around a bit. But also when the camera is a pan-tilt zoom camera, which can follow the lecturer around as they're walking around, but it can also zoom in on them. But the movement of the camera often looks mechanical. The zoom is usually a digital zoom, which means it's just cropping in to the image, which reduces the image resolution. And overall, the audio and video quality is often poor, mostly because lecturers have no training in how to use the microphones, and because the lighting in lecture theatres is all about being dark enough to ensure the PowerPoint slides being projected on the big screen can be seen, rather than being light enough to allow the scene to be filmed. Now, there's nothing wrong with those kinds of videos. They do the job just fine. But their aesthetic is usually accidental rather than intentional. And because of that, students often come away with the impression that the PowerPoint slides used in those videos are the most important part. And if you can just get your hands on the slides, there's no real need to watch the video, because the video is really just all about the slides. The problem is that the PowerPoint slides, the PowerPoint presentations, don't work well as video presentations. And that's because the slides are mostly static. Each slide sits on screen, often for several minutes at a time. And that's not how video works. Video, by definition, is built around moving images. But with PowerPoint, nothing much moves. I mean, we call them PowerPoint slides, but honestly, PowerPoint stills would be a more accurate name. When watching these presentations, you can look away from the screen, go make a cup of tea, and when you come back to the screen, the same slide is still there. And when what's on screen doesn't change, the viewer's attention doesn't have much reason to stay. It's not that the lecturer is a poor presenter, although realistically, most of us have had no formal training in public speaking, so it's almost miraculous that we're any good at all. The real reason that we have a problem is that the video aesthetic in those PowerPoint videos just isn't that engaging. And that problem is magnified by the lack of professional production behind most of those videos. In many cases, the entire recording process is automated, or the lecturer is told to just use whatever default settings the hardware and software that they're given comes with. And the hardware is typically chosen because it's cheap, and the software typically chosen because it's reliable and easy to use. Your typical lecturer is not given access to anything that remotely resembles what you'd expect to see in a professional video production workflow. And that's largely because that equipment is expensive and hard to use. Then there's another constraint. The platforms universities use to stream their lecturers' teaching videos must comply with accessibility legislation. That means built-in captions, transcripts, screen reader support, keyboard hotkeys for volume control, proper contrast, predictable interfaces, and so on. These are essential, and we should provide them, and they should be there. But they also push institutions towards using somewhat safe, standardized tools that prioritize compliance and reliability over high production value or creative freedom. And on top of that, some institutions prefer to keep their teaching content in a walled garden, restricted to internal systems, so it can only be accessed in-house by students enrolled at the university. And that further limits the choice of platforms and tools, because everything has to integrate with the university's internal systems, and it all has to be secured, all locked down. And reliability and control in those circumstances takes priority over aesthetics and production values. And finally, the video platforms universities use are built for stability, not quality. The audio and video is heavily compressed, so file sizes are kept small, and the assumption is that this is perfectly fine because lecturers are assumed to be recording on laptops and students are presumed to be watching on laptops. And because of that, who needs high resolution video and who needs studio quality audio? They're just seen as things that are not necessary. Now, the result is you get teaching videos that are perfectly functional, but are rarely immersive and are often, both in audio and visuals, quite unappealing. And those videos demand quite a lot from those who have to watch those videos. You have to be pretty committed to learning to watch them. If you're even slightly disengaged, these formats don't do much to pull you back in. But there's another problem. There's this notion that comes up again and again in higher education, which is called cognitive load. It started to creep in around the 1990s. I first started hearing about it in the 1990s when I was teaching. And it's become more and more influential, and it particularly got influential around the 2010s onwards. And this notion comes from, well, largely comes from psychology, from my folk. And it kind of rests on a simple claim that learning depends on a thing called working memory, and working memory is quite limited and it's easily overwhelmed. So the argument is that if students are watching images on a screen and they're listening to sounds and narration, they're having to read text, they're having to try and interpret diagrams that are being shown to them, and all of this is happening at the same time, that they can quickly become overwhelmed and end up absorbing little to none of the material being presented to them. The idea of this cognitive load, or being cognitively overloaded, is then used to justify the stripping back of presentations, to reduce the number of moving parts, to make something that's already quite still even stiller. And this idea goes further. It promotes a move away from the 1 hour lecture format and towards something closer to a 15 to 20 minute lecture format. The assumption here seems to be that students can't sit through a 1 hour lecture and struggle with presentations that use different modalities simultaneously. But the thing is, ask students whether they can watch, enjoy, and learn from and remember movies. They say yes. And movies combine visuals, dialogue, music, sound effects, and complex narratives involving multiple plots and multiple subplots and a vast array of characters. And students can take all of that in, and they can even read subtitles on top of it all. And they can sit through that for hours at a time. Avengers Endgame, Oppenheimer, massively popular films, and they're over 3 hours long. That's not to mention The Lord of the Rings. Each of those was 3 hours. You watch the whole trilogy, it takes you over 9 hours. And some folks do that. They watch it all in one go. And how about people who binge watch their favourite TV programmes, which can mean they're sitting there for 6 hours or more in one sitting? And they don't seem cognitively overwhelmed at all by that. So surely cognitive load can't be the whole story. Actually, what I think it points to is the problem of emotional underload. The lecture didn't stir their emotions. The teaching video didn't stir their emotions. We know that learning is much easier, much deeper, and much longer lasting when it involves thinking and feeling. In fact, emotion is the thing that most often drives learning. It motivates people to learn, particularly the feeling of curiosity. But lectures aren't things we associate with emotions. And that's largely because of social norms around how you should and shouldn't behave in a lecture. You should be quiet, remain still, don't interrupt. And if you start to feel emotional, perhaps leave, so as not to disturb anyone. And that's because lectures are framed as cognitive spaces. It's a place where you go to think, not to feel. And in a cinema, there's almost a compulsion to feel. Okay, don't be too loud, sit relatively still and somewhat quietly, but it's okay to scream at a scary bit, to laugh at a funny bit, and to cry at an emotional bit. It's permissible to engage emotionally with what you're seeing on the screen, almost to the point of it being expected. And that's why a student can sit through long movies, but maybe can't sit through long lectures, because it's missing that emotional component. It's the emotions what generate curiosity, but also empathy, and that leads to engagement. When you're at the movies, you're curious as to where the story is going, and you empathize with the characters involved, and you in turn become involved in the story. So maybe we can learn from cinema, and maybe more of us who are teaching could use that filmic look in our teaching videos. But there's actually another reason, a different type of reason, why we might want to do that. And that's because some of the techniques used in cinematography that are used to create a filmic look might have fidelity with the thing we teach. They might actually help us to teach particular things. And that's the main reason I try to use some of the techniques used in cinematography to create more of a filmic look in my teaching videos. And those techniques are the framing, which tends to be wide, the depth of field, which tends to be shallow, the dynamic range, which tends to be high, and the frame rate, which tends to be slow, along with paying quite careful attention to where the camera's positioned and how it moves, how the scene is lit, and how the colours are rendered. I'm doing all of that right now in this video. I might not be doing it very well, but I am doing it. So in part 2, I'll tell you how I'm trying to do it. And then in part 3, all about those techniques, I'll describe all of the techniques and tell you how I'm using them. And then in part 3, I'll tell you why I'm doing it, or trying to do it. Why this cinema look has got fidelity with the things I teach. And the things I teach are qualitative methods and critical psychology. And at the end of part 3, I'll also tell you why cinematographers will likely roll their eyes and tell us that none of this stuff is actually what makes anything look cinematic, and that we've completely missed the point. And they'll be right in that, and there's some lessons to be drawn from it. Okay, so till then, hope to see you in part 2, if not in another video. Thanks for sticking with this one. Ta-da.